Test 1 2. Test 1 2.
You can't hear me without this? If you have trouble hearing me way in the back there or way out the door there, let me know and I'll speak up. But I don't think you have trouble hearing me in here, do you? Okay. You all right? I know. So are you able to hear me? Oh, oh, it is good? You don't want to put earplugs in so you don't have to listen? Do you really? Something wrong with this guy, fellas? Well, this never ends, This goes on forever and ever. All right.
Are we ready, or we have got just a couple more minutes? She wants us to wait till 10 o'clock.
10 o'clock? I'm sorry, we're taking time out for a short commercial. So we've got nothing to sell, but we're going to do the commercial anyway. Anita, you got to give the commercial. Come on.
I gotta give the commercial.
Right. Come on. Do
Commercial.
a good one. Do a good one. Do the lion or the deer. Hey, Carl, you know that one? Yeah. You ought to go vegan. Is that the one? Isn't that a great ad? I love it. Come on.
What about the ones in, the Geico?
Yeah.
When they're in the stands and is it the insurance agents? And they do the dance in the stands?
Oh, the Geico.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's a good one.
That's his favorite.
Yeah, do that one. Okay,
Which one
go
is
ahead.
favorite?
Carl.
Oh, Carl. I love Carl. I think he's great. I love those
His
deer
next
with the.
favorite is the Aflac duck.
Yes.
Yeah, I have to tell you, there was when was it? We were in Washington, and my granddaughter, we were walking across a pond, and looking at the pond, there were 2 ducks below, and I looked at the 2 ducks, and nobody said anything. I yelled down at them, Aflac, Aflac. Well, they all thought I was crazy, Isn't that right? The ducks replied, though, didn't they?
He also talks to the dogs.
Yeah, but I love, more than dogs or anything else, you guys are the ones that I want to talk to, because I've got something to tell you that you've never heard of before, so, and that's the point. Now, what time is it? Are we there yet? How are we doing?
2 minutes to go.
2 minutes to go?
This
You
is
want
the
to?
2-minute warning.
You want to take this and do
Okay. I'll take
your intro, and I'll pop in.
it. Okay. Aflac. No. Yes. Thank you. They asked my son. He didn't answer.
Where on the internet does this go?
We have it on our Columbus County webpage.
Oh, okay.
And so we have several schools throughout the county that are streaming in because the...
Can you see it again, or is this just a one-time?
we will be able to video if that's okay with you.
You can
Is that okay
pick
with
it
you?
out on the Columbus County?
I think so. It'll be archived, yes.
All right.
Yes, in case somebody's out sick.
Oh, okay, so I can,
You can see it too.
I can go on into the
Yes.
Columbus County
Right.
website.
And it'll be archived there, and I'll give you the link before we leave.
Please, give me the link.
Yes, we'll do that.
I just left the Pittsburgh.
Okay.
Just hold the mic a little closer.
Closer, okay.
It's coming in really well, but just a little bit closer to the mouth.
Okay.
And I talked to a couple schools. It was coming in really good.
Okay, and I'll do the intro, and if it's not loud enough, we can...
Hold your mic really close.
Okay.
That's
Okay.
picture it really well.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
The question was, Kelly, if this is archived, Mr. Jones?
Yes.
Do they have access to the PowerPoint web?
We can pull it off separately.
Separately, you can pull it, okay.
Mm-hmm. What you think? Mm-hmm.
That's too dark, isn't it?
Okay, just do one. Is that good? Okay. It's 10 o'clock, we can go. All right, good morning. We are so excited and we're so thankful to have our visitors here with us this morning and all of you in our classrooms throughout the county, everybody that is joining us. A quick introduction. We have Alfred Snog and Anita Snog. Alfred was born in Cologne, Germany in 1931, and at the age of 7, he and his family escaped from Nazi Germany on the morning after Kristallnacht. They settled in Amsterdam, Holland, and immigrated to the United States of America barely 1 month before the Nazis invaded Holland. Alfred Snog married Anita, whom he met in 1977, when she worked as treasurer of his company in New York. They married in 1991, and together they have 4 children who have blessed them with 11 grandchildren aged 6 to 24. Alfred and Anita Snog moved to North Carolina in 1995 and now live on Bald Head Island, North Carolina, and conduct their business in Wilmington, North Carolina. Alfred now shares the story of his family's escape from Nazi Germany by speaking at middle schools, high schools, colleges, and communities throughout North Carolina. We are very thankful and excited to welcome Mr. and Mrs. Snog. Yes, thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for that very kind introduction. And let me say good morning to all you youngsters and folks out in Columbus County. It's a pleasure to be here. We had a wonderful greeting as we arrived here at the Williams Township School, and I must tell you we're thrilled to be here, and I'm thrilled to be able to pass along a little story about a very important part of my life as a youngster in Germany. You ready? She's ready. Okay. I'm going to talk to you about my personal recollections and the impressions they made on me as a child living in Germany during the time of the Nazi dictatorship. These were years just prior to World War II, during which the seeds of the Holocaust genocide were planted, seeds that would flower into the annihilation of 6 million Jews and 5 million others, and those others included gypsies, Roma and Sinti, Jehovah's Witnesses, homosexuals, and political opponents of the Nazis, the communists and the socialists, most of whom had lived in Europe for hundreds of years. To put my personal experience into perspective, it's important for you to know what happened there, because genocide did not come to an end with the victory of the Allies over Germany. We've seen many other incidents of genocide since then. Cambodia, Kosovo, Darfur, the Congo, just to mention a few. First, I would like to take you back to Germany just after World War I and what happened in the 15 years just before Hitler assumed power. Germany, after World War I, was mired in economic chaos, joblessness, and runaway inflation. Now, I can tell you a little bit about that inflation, how bad it was, because I remember as a child talking to my grandfather, who had served in the German army during World War I and afterwards was raising his family in Cologne. He told me about the inflation, and what happened was the money became totally worthless. The Germans printed Reichsmarks in huge denominations, but even that wasn't enough. He told me that in order to buy a loaf of bread, he had to fill a wheelbarrow with Deutschmarks, with the currency. And of course, this became very, very impractical. So what happened? A trading economy evolved. People couldn't use money to exchange for goods. My grandfather was a tailor and he made clothing, so he would exchange his job of making clothing for people in exchange for foodstuffs that his family needed to survive on. That's how bad it was. And of course, when economic chaos is really bad, people lose their jobs, things get really tough. And that's what happened after World War I. Joblessness, widespread and political turmoil made the country virtually ungovernable. The armistice agreement that had ended World War I demanded that steep reparations be paid by Germany to the Allies. Indeed, the last of these payments were made just a year ago in 2011. Can you imagine? The Nazi Party took advantage of this political chaos and turmoil. They used the time-tested strategy of fingering a scapegoat to blame for all their misfortunes. I'm sure you've seen familiar tactics in current political posturing around the world. For the Nazis, the scapegoats were the Jews, an easy and historic target in Europe. The Nazis were a minority party in the Reichstag, Germany's governing body, but their rabble-rousing tactics and inflammatory rhetoric finally persuaded Hindenburg to appoint Hitler to the post of Chancellor in 1933. Hindenburg was the president of the Weimar Republic just before Hitler came in. It did not take long for the Nazi Party to put into effect their racial ideology. Believing Aryans to be racially superior, they set out to purify Germany of any inferior races who would pollute their racial ideals. Purification led to selective breeding, eugenics, and involuntary sterilization of individuals deemed to be physically or mentally handicapped. That also included children of mixed African and German descent. Now here you see before you a photograph of a poster that was actually printed in 1938, and it was published. It's a calendar. It was published, a Kalender des Politischen Amtes. It was published by the Political Race Bureau in Germany. And it shows the ideal Aryan couple, what the Germans wanted to create in Germany. They wanted a whole race of Aryans that were handsome, blonde-haired, beautiful women, and children that were perfect in every way, that had no blemishes of any kind, that were mentally pure. And if they weren't, chances are they wouldn't survive childbirth. That's how strict the Nazis were in trying to foment this ideal of racial superiority. In 1935, the Nazis passed the Nuremberg laws, and they had some very important changes that changed everything in Germany. One, they prohibited marriage between Jews and German nationals. Why did they forbid that? Because they didn't want Jewish blood to be mixed with their Aryan ideals. Relations outside of marriage between Jews and German nationals was forbidden. And 3, Jews cannot be citizens of the Reich. Now that last one was probably the most important, because now anti-Semitism had become state policy in Germany. Yes. The Nazis made sure that the Nuremberg laws were strictly enforced. Here you see a photograph of a couple that apparently had been caught having relations. And The man, you see the two policemen and you see the couple just next to them. The man has a sign hung around his neck, and what it says on the sign is, Ich bin ein Rassenschänder. I am a race defiler. So they were serious about this nonsense. And the laws were strictly enforced. And they took these people away, and no doubt they wound up in jail for some period of time. Here's another photograph, and this shows a relationship between a white German girl and a black German girl, and this says, Das Ergebnis. The result of this relationship is what they mean. And down here it says, Die Rassenstolz schwindet. Pride of race disappears. So you can see what they were attempting to do. I was then 4 years old. My immediate family consisted of my parents, Margaret and Ludwig Schnoog, and my twin brother, Norbert. We have been able to trace our ancestor to the mid-18th century into the 1750s. We lived in Cologne, Germany, a city that dates itself to ancient Rome and was a center of culture and liberal thought in Germany. We lived in an apartment on the Universitätsstraße, opposite a large park which I could view from the windows of our apartment. At the same time that my brother and I were old enough to enter school, the Nazis had forbidden Jews to go to school with German or Aryan children. Jewish teachers had been dismissed from German schools, and my brother and I attended a Jewish school. The year was 1936 or 1937, and Hitler and the Nazi regime had been in power for 3 or 4 years, during which time the Reichstag, Germany's governing power, had given Hitler supreme powers in governing the nation. Jews had become the enemy class. Newspapers published the most malicious, slanderous articles directed against Jews, and the Goebbels propaganda machine railed against Jews and spewed venomous accusations. You'll see a very important publication that came out daily or weekly in Germany called the Stürmer, the Storm, and this one shows the headline, Wer ist der Feind? Who is the enemy? And then there's an article which is very anti-Semitic in every way, and down at the bottom here, if you can see it, it says, Die Juden sind unser Unglück. The Jews are our misfortune. So that kind of thing went on. And here you see the same newspaper, the Stürmer, and it is posted on a signboard probably in the center of a town in Germany where everybody came to read the newspaper. They didn't necessarily buy the paper at a newsstand, but they came to read it in these areas. Jewish teachers, professors at leading universities, artists, musicians, authors were ostracized and dismissed from their positions. Well-meaning Germans who opposed Nazi anti-Semitism failed to make their voices heard because the consequences of doing so threatened their own livelihood. How often did my parents hear the refrain, "What can we do?" As children, we early on became acquainted with the police state that the Nazi regime forced on its citizens. Our parents did not hide, nor could they hide, the fear that the secret police, the Geheime Staatspolizei, better known as the Gestapo, engendered in every walk of life. The Gestapo had extraordinary powers to arrest citizens for all acts considered treasonous or criminal, and Jews, solely because of their religion, were under the Gestapo magnifying glass. The fear of being denounced to the Gestapo for the least of infractions was ever present, and being arrested by the Gestapo meant harsh questioning and often a ticket to Theresienstadt, the nearest concentration camp. We learned to keep a low profile to avoid any contact with the dreaded Gestapo. Now, you may ask, how do I know all this and how do I remember it? I was a young man, after all, very young, younger than you are. Well, let me tell you about a practice that we had in Germany, and in many other places in Europe this was true as well. In the afternoons, after the men came home from their jobs, if they had them, and the neighbors were home, they would be invited to our house. And we would, my mother would prepare coffee, and she would always have cake or some sort of pies, etc., on the table, and we would all sit around the table enjoying the coffee and the cakes with Schlagsahne, with whipped cream on them. I loved it as a child. And as children, we were required and expected to be present at that table with the adults. And the adults would converse. They would hold conversations about what was happening to their friends, what was happening in the community, what they were thinking about politics, so they could speak amongst themselves. And obviously, there weren't any Nazis around the table where my family had its Kaffeeklatsch. But this is how we learned about what was going on. We would listen and we would ask the adults questions. One of the interesting things that we learned while we were sitting around that table was one day one of them mentioned that a dear friend who everybody knew had committed suicide. Now, I don't know how old you were before or when you learned what suicide was, but I was perhaps 6 years old at the time. I didn't know what it was, but we asked the question, and when we were told that the man had taken his own life, we said, well, why would he want to do anything like that? Why would anybody want to kill themselves? And it was explained to us that he had lost his job, he had become despondent, he couldn't support his family, and he just wanted a way out. And this, he chose to take his life to do so. It's a tough lesson for a 6 or a 7-year-old to learn. So I mention it because this is how a lot of the news and a lot of the things that I learned that was going on, how I learned them. This is how we learned them around that table. We also learned that as Jews, we were hated. Could you put up the next sign, please? Yes. In the shopping centers in Germany, those stores owned by Jews suddenly had Jude painted on the store windows, and that means Jews. So they were trying to boycott Jewish stores and merchants. They didn't want anybody to go and purchase anybody from any store that was owned by Jews. Pull up the next one, please. Yes. And then, most importantly, this sign began to appear in all public places and wherever, almost everywhere you went. And what does this sign say? It says, Juden sind hier unerwünscht. Jews are not wanted here. Now, let me tell you, my mother used to take my brother and I to a beach on the Rhine River. The Rhine flows right through Cologne. It's a beautiful river, and we'd love to go there on weekends and enjoy the beach right on the river where we would go in. I couldn't swim at the time, but we certainly liked wading in there and watching how the adults were learning how to swim. It was just very enjoyable. One day we went there to enjoy an afternoon. And sure enough, there was this sign right at the gatehouse of that beach. And my mother looked at the attendant whom she had known for quite some time, and she says, "What does this mean?" And she said, "Oh, you know, we have to put this up. We are not allowed to, we don't want Jews here." And she said, "You know, we've been coming here for years and we're Jewish." And she said, "Well, I didn't know you were Jewish. But listen," she said, "you and your children, you know, we know you. You can come in. This is really not meant against you, but I have to put this up because if I don't do so, then we're going to be asked by the police why we don't show the sign. So please come in, but please don't say anything to anybody. Don't tell them that you are Jewish, and just don't say anything." So we learned that we had to live an undercover life. We couldn't admit what we were or who we were or how we worshiped. Now we went in that day because my mother didn't want to disappoint her children. My brother and I, we wanted to go out and we wanted to play on the beach, but we never went back. And of course, now I understand why we never went back. There were other instances. There, along the Rhine River, up on the banks, are some very old medieval castles, which are wonderful to see because they were flying the old medieval flags and knighthood and what have you. And as children, of course, we wanted to go and visit those castles. We wanted to explore inside and see what it was like and get up on the towers and look out over the Rhine River. And we pestered our parents, "Please take us there, we want to see it." And finally we broke them down and they said, "Okay, boys, we're going to take you, but remember what we've always said. We have to be careful. We're Jewish, they're going to have that sign on there and they're not going to want us there, and if they discover that we're Jewish, we're going to be thrown out and embarrassed and maybe taken in by the police, and we don't want that to happen." And one thing further, when you go to the latrine, if you have to go, be sure you cover yourself, because if they see that you've been circumcised, they will know that you're Jewish, and that would cause a problem for us. So that's how deeply how cautious we had to be not to expose ourselves as Jews in Germany. Yeah, that's a good one. My grandparents lived in Deutz. It's a small community just across the Rhine River from Cologne. And you'd have to cross this bridge that you see here, the Hohenzollern Bridge, in order to get there. And we would frequently go to visit our grandparents, my grandfather, because they lived very near the synagogue in Cologne where we worshiped. And also there was a Jewish community right in that area. So one day we were crossing that bridge. My father was driving the car, and when he got to the middle of the bridge, he stopped the car, pulled over to the side, and he removed from his pocket a revolver. Well, you can imagine, for a couple of 5 or 6-year-olds at the time, our eyes were about this big. How? You have a gun? How did you get that? And why didn't you tell us you had a gun? What he did next amazed us even more. He took the gun and took it apart, all its pieces. And he took the pieces, he stepped out of the car and went to the edge of the bridge, and he tossed the pieces into the Rhine River. And when he got back into the car, my brother and I set upon him and said, "Why did you do that? If you had a gun and you wanted to get rid of it, why didn't you just give it to us? We could play with it. You know, it's a nice thing to have. Everybody wants one of those." Cowboys and Indians were well known in Germany too, and we were listening to and reading these things. So we wanted to know why he got rid of that weapon. Well, we were told that the Nazis had promulgated a law that said that Jews were not permitted to own firearms or any weapons, and that they had to be turned into the Gestapo. Well, my father was not going to turn in a gun, a weapon, a pistol to the Nazis to use God knows where. And we learned something at that moment. We realized that we had an obligation to resist what we felt was a unfair government, an unfair law. And this was the first sign of resistance that we saw from my father, that he would not obey that law. There was further resistance by my family, which we will get to a little bit later, but that was the first sign of it. Now, we used to go over there to our grandparents' house quite frequently, and my brother and I enjoyed going with my grandfather and my grandmother to the synagogue in Cologne. And I remember my favorite holiday at that time, still is today, was a holiday called Simchas Torah. Now, if in Judaism, if you know anything about it, what happens is on every Saturday we read a section of the Torah. It starts with Genesis and it ends with Deuteronomy. So it is really the first books of the Bible, from Exodus to Deuteronomy. And upon the completion of that first round, when you get to Deuteronomy, you start over again, and start the next day, in the next week you start again with Exodus. And that day, when you finish reading it, is the day called Simchas Torah. It translates to joy of Torah. And it's a very joyous holiday. I would sit with my grandfather and my father down in the auditorium of the synagogue, and the women all would sit in the balcony seats surrounding the bema, the temple, the ark of the temple. And during the holiday, the women would throw candies down to the audience, down to the auditorium down below. And my brother and I would spend a lot of time running around gathering as much of the candy as we possibly could and stuffing our pockets, just the way you guys do on Halloween. You come home with a load of candy, and of course at our age we loved that, as we all did. So I remember that holiday very, very well. And so we visited them, and that's what we did over there often. We, as children, we were not, as I told you before, we were not permitted to attend school with German or Aryan children. So we attended a Jewish school. And one day we were in school, and suddenly the door opened, and two men came into our classroom. They were dressed in leather coats, and they had boots on, and they called out the names of two of our fellow students. And they said, "You are coming with us, you are arrested, we're taking you out of class." Well, of course, everybody was stunned. How can anybody come into your classroom and just simply arrest two students and take them out? And when we came home that night, we asked our parents for an explanation as to why they had come in to take these boys out of our class. Well, it was explained to us what was happening in Germany. And what was happening was that there were many immigrants coming into Germany from Poland because there were Jews who were fleeing anti-Semitism in Poland, and they had hoped that they could find jobs in Germany where Jews had pretty much assimilated into the community, and they wanted to make a life for themselves and their children there, or perhaps move on and get out of Europe altogether. Well, the Nazis saw these people who had come in from Poland as illegal immigrants, and they arrested whomever they could catch, and they gathered up their children from wherever they were. In our case, it were the two boys that were our classmates, and they took them out, and with their parents together, they sent them back to Poland. And I am sure that those two boys who were in the class with us wound up among the 6 million Jews who lost their lives later on in the concentration camps in Europe. Put the parade on, if you would. From our window in the apartment, we could see many parades that the Nazis held in Germany. This is not from the window of our apartment, but it is similar. It is a parade of Nazi youth in the city, and there were a lot of these. And as children, you see this and you say, you know, that's pretty nice. I'd like to be a part of this organization. Well, these were all Hitler Youth people, and they paraded with the Nazi flags, as you can see here. And but we knew that as Jews, we would not be allowed to be a part of that. And although we longed to be a part of it, we could not. And so I'm just showing you this is the kinds of thing that we saw every weekend in Europe. These parades and this patriotic fervor on the part of the Nazis was everywhere. And still today, I hate the thought of patriotism that's driven by political means such as the Nazis did. And I distrust it. If it's driven by governmental policy, that subverts thoughtful reasoning and individual liberty. My father worked for a Jewish company in the city of Cologne, and his company was instrumental in purchasing and selling vital materials that were needed by German industry, particularly their armaments industry. And the Germans were busy developing their armaments to fight World War II. The Nazis, the company my father worked for was owned by Jews, and the Nazis took over all Jewish-owned businesses. But they insisted, they didn't fire my father or his colleagues who were Jewish, but they insisted that they stay and work and teach them how to acquire and trade these vital commodities that they needed. So my father knew that the time would come when he had to leave if he wanted to make a life for himself and his family. This was very short term. He wasn't going to survive in that company that was owned now by the Nazis. And so they started looking around for ways to get out of Germany. My father went to the American embassy in Stuttgart, and he made an application to get a visa for the United States. But to get a visa was a very, very difficult thing to do because, first of all, there were very few places that were available for immigrants to the United States, and in order to get a visa, you had to apply for it, and they put a number on your application, and they put it into a lottery system, and if they happened to draw the number, then you were the lucky person and you could get that visa. So the chances of doing so were mighty slim. My mother, who was an ardent Zionist, would have loved to have left Germany and gone to Palestine, but the English, who had the mandate over Palestine in those years, did not allow the immigration of Jews. And so it was around the world. The doors were closed. And the interesting thing is that the Nazis in those years were interested only in getting rid of the Jews in their country. There were altogether in Germany 500,000, is it? 500,000 Jews in a total population of 15 million. But they wanted them out. So if they could get them out, they could leave. But they didn't make it easy. So my father, fortunately, his company was an international company. And they had offices in England, they had offices in Holland and Amsterdam. And my father asked whether there would be a space in any one of those companies in England or in Holland, or they even had a company in the United States, whether they could find a job for him there. And yes, he was fortunate. His colleagues in Amsterdam, Holland said, yes, if you can get out of Germany, we have a place for you here in our company. So we made plans to move from Germany to Amsterdam. And the moving people came in to pack up our furniture and all our belongings, and we shipped them off to Holland. And on November 9th, 1938, we made arrangements to move into the Dome Hotel in the center of Cologne. Because all our furniture was gone, we needed a place to sleep. And on the 10th, the morning of the 10th, we had purchased tickets to take the train from Cologne to Amsterdam. Now, the Dome Hotel is located right next to the Dome Cathedral, which is a major cathedral in Germany, very historic. And the hotel was just next to it. And the train station was a few blocks away, so we could just get up in the morning and go take the train and go to Amsterdam. Well, my parents took my brother and I and put us to bed in the hotel. And of course, we were very excited. We had a difficult time falling asleep in anticipation of the trip that we were going to make the following day to Amsterdam. And we had hardly fallen asleep when our parents woke us up. And they said, boys, come with us. And they told us to stand in the opening between the floor-to-ceiling drapes that covered the window of our hotel. Now, we were on the second floor of the hotel, and just below us, we could see a high-end shopping street, high-end similar to what you have, let's say, in Madison Avenue in New York. There were many shops, very pretty and beautiful shops selling wonderful merchandise. And many of the shops there were owned by Jewish merchants. And they placed us here in the opening of those drapes so that we could look out but could not be seen from the street below. Well, what we saw was an eye-opener. Brown-shirted, uniformed SA Schutzabteilung Nazis, Nazi youth groups, and Nazi hoodlums were throwing stones into the shop windows of the stores just below our window. They were breaking the glass, they were stepping into the shops, they were picking up the merchandise and throwing it out scattering it out on the street, where it clattered And while they were doing so, they were shouting with glee and yelling anti-Semitic comments. Did you get it? I think you need a little. That's it. There you go. This is what we saw the morning after the street below. They were throwing the merchandise out onto the street where it clattered and shattered, and they were yelling Nazi slogans and anti-Semitic remarks as they did so. My parents realized that we were staring down at them with amazement. And they tapped us on the shoulder and they said, "Boys, never forget what you see here tonight." And I can tell you now that I've never forgotten it. We then learned the following day of the burning of synagogues in Cologne, the synagogue where my brother and I had collected candy, right near my grandparents' house. There were 1,600 other synagogues in Germany that were burned that night. It was an organized riot led by the Nazis and fomented by the Nazis. That night we refer to today as Kristallnacht, and there followed the following day there followed degrading assaults on Jewish men and women who were roused out of their homes, marched down the street with refuse hurled at them, and they were made to scrub the sidewalk with toothbrushes. Their homes were ransacked and furnishings destroyed. Here you see the burning of the synagogue in Dresden. Go on, push the next one. It was completely gutted and destroyed. Keep going. And here are some of the homes that were invaded by the Nazis, homes of Jews, and then also just vandalized. On November 11th, 1938, the Dallas Morning News headline read, "Hysterical Nazis wreck thousands of Jewish shops, burn synagogues in wild orgy of looting and terror. Policemen refuse to halt organized riot in Germany." This is the Dallas News, Dallas, Texas. And when you hear about Holocaust denial of all the things that happened, which some people profess that this was all a hoax, just go back and look at the newspapers of that period of time. It's all there, as you can see from this headline. The next morning, we arose and we made our way to the station, the railroad station in Cologne, and we boarded the train. What we did not know when we boarded the train was that the Nazis had sealed the borders of Germany to all its neighboring countries, because they didn't want anybody to come into Germany during the period of these riots. They didn't want them to know what was happening. And so they just closed all the borders. So we got on the train, and the train took off on its way to Amsterdam, and at the border the train was stopped. And Nazi policemen boarded the train, and they asked all the passengers for their travel papers. Now, you may know that travel papers in Germany, if you were Jewish, all had a red letter J stamped on their passports. So they knew who the Jews were, and there were perhaps a dozen or 24 Jews on the train with us that day going to Amsterdam. Well, they took us off the train, and they marched us to a jail in the neighboring town. And we were placed into a jail cell. Now, I remember as a child being in that cell. I can remember the color of the walls were painted a light green, and today I won't not have a room in my house painted in light green, but that's what it was. The only furniture in that jail cell, the only furniture was a commode, which to relieve ourselves. And my brother and I, when we had to go and relieve ourselves, we had to do it in front of all the other passengers who were in that jail cell with us. There were maybe a dozen or 15 other passengers right in that same cell. But our fellow passengers were very kind. They'd take off their overcoats. They'd hold them around us so that we wouldn't be embarrassed when we had to go to use the commode. We didn't know what was going to happen, but the Nazis started to interrogate all the passengers individually. And as I told you before, the Nazis at that time, this was 1938, were still wanting to get rid of their Jews. They didn't want them in Germany. And a bunch of the passengers that were with us in that jail cell were able to show that they had visas to come to the United States and that they were heading to Holland to sail from Rotterdam to the United States in the next day or so. So they let them go. Now, we did not have visas or any such documentation. But my father had brought with him a letter from his company that said that his business was vital to German industry. And when he was interrogated, he showed this to the interrogator and he said, "Look, I have to go. This is important business for my company. The company is one of the biggest companies in Germany. It's owned by the Nazis, and you better let us go. And if you don't let us go, you're going to have to explain it to the officer in charge of this company. So you better think twice before you try to hold us up." And he gave him the old Heil Hitler salute, and guess what happened? He said, "Okay, you can go. We'll let you go." And they took us to the border, which was not very far away from the jail. And there was a square, I don't think it was any larger than this room. And we had to go through a customs check. Germans were very careful not to allow anybody to leave with any items that were contraband, that they didn't want allow them to take out, money, things like that. So we went through this arduous process of having all our clothes examined, including the linings in our coats and everything, so that we did not take any contraband out of Germany. And when that was done, we were standing in the square, and there were two Nazi policemen right next to us. I remember them. They had boots up to their knees. They were dressed in black. And one of them looked at my father, and he said, "You and your wife can leave, but we're going to take your children, and we're going to put them in a camp nearby. And when you come back to Germany, you can collect them then." Well, we were 7 years old. When I heard that, I became extremely agitated and frightened, and so did my brother. We started to cry. We did not want to leave our parents. We were afraid what might happen to us. We were depending on our parents for everything, and here they were threatening to separate us. So what did we do? Like every 7-year-old would, we screamed and we hollered, no, we don't want to go, and all of this. My mother looked at us, she looked at the Germans and said to herself, I'm not going to let this happen. She was accustomed to carrying with her in her pocketbook a small paring knife, which she used to peel apples, which was a custom in Europe, to peel the fruit before you ate it. She took out that knife and she said to the Nazi policeman, our children are going with us, and if you attempt to stop me, I'm going to cut their throats right here, and then I'm going to cut my own throat. Now, you may ask, was I frightened? I don't think that it ever registered in my mind that my mother would attempt to kill me. All I was worried about was being separated from my parents, and I'm sure my brother felt the same thing. I don't know how much time passed. Couldn't have been all that much, but seemed a long time. Finally, one of the Germans said to my parents, take your brats and get out of here. It was my mother's resistance to orders that were given by the police that saved our lives that day, because it didn't take us long to cross the border into Holland. Now, what would have happened if she had meekly said, okay, and God knows what would have happened to my brother and I. If you're at all familiar with what happened in Germany during those years and afterwards, you'll know that the Germans had a policy of trying to physically change people so that they could be more Aryan. And there was a Dr. Mengele who did experiments, particularly on twins, and we were twins. So had it happened, I'm sure that I would not be standing here today talking to you. We went into Holland and we were met by one of my father's colleagues who took us into Amsterdam and who had arranged a home for us, an apartment in the city. And my parents took my brother and I to the nearest school and entered us into a Dutch school. Didn't take us very long to learn Dutch because the language is not all that different from German, and there's a lot of German in that language. There's also a lot of English in the Dutch language, which was very helpful later on in our lives. But we learned the language in very quick order. And we loved Holland, and Holland was very good to us. My father went to work there. We spent a lot of time visiting Dutch sites. We went to see the tulip fields. My parents were able still in 1939 to get my grandparents and my aunt out of Cologne and have them join us in Amsterdam. Again, because the Nazis were still more interested in getting rid of Jews than in killing them. That came a little bit later. So we visited my grandparents who lived very near us quite often. And one of the things my brother and I enjoyed doing, we'd go to the canals. There are a lot of canals in Holland. And in the winter they would freeze. And people would skate down the canals and all over the city of Amsterdam. We loved watching that. Wanted to take part in it, but unfortunately we didn't have ice skates. But it was very enjoyable. We had lived there about a year and a half, and in the interim, while we were there, the Germans invaded Poland, and England declared war on Germany because they had a treaty with Poland that if they were attacked, they would enter the war. and they did. The Russians invaded Finland, and there was a war going on there. The whole Europe seemed to be in turmoil. And suddenly, one day while we were home, we got a telephone call from the American embassy in The Hague. And the man from the American embassy said to Mr. Schnoeg, said, if you take your children and come to The Hague and for a physical examination, you will get a visa to come to the United States. We had won that lottery. And let me tell you something, that lottery is worth more than any lottery that you could win here for millions of dollars, because getting into the United States saved our lives and was also a blessing for our whole family. But a decision had to be made. Are we going to now leave Holland? Because Holland was a neutral. They had declared their neutrality, and and nobody thought that they would be involved in the wars that were going on in Europe just before it all fell apart. So the decision had to be made. Shall we go? Shall we have to leave our grandparents in Holland? They will not be able to come unless we get established in the United States, and then we can hopefully get them visas to come to the United States. We'll have to start all over, have to get a new job. My father would have to find a position here in the United States. We would have to learn the English language, which we didn't know. What shall we do? But with what was going on in Germany and the words that they had used when we witnessed Kristallnacht, which is what you see here, never forget it. The next words were, if it can happen there, it can happen here, or it can happen anywhere. So the decision was made, we're going to go. And they purchased passage from England to the United States on board the vessel Britannic, which was to sail in early 1940 from England to the United States. And we purchased passage on an airplane from Amsterdam to London. Now that was very exciting, because here we were, 2 9-year-olds by this time, getting very excited about getting on an airplane for the first time in our lives. And in those days, flying on an airplane was not a very common thing. So this was one of the first things that we would be doing, is being able to fly. And we looked forward to getting on that airplane and looking out of the window and looking down and seeing what we could see. And it was very exciting. I remember the excitement that we had. Well, we made our way to Schiphol Airport when the day came to leave Amsterdam. And there was the plane sitting on the runway. The plane was a DC-3, an old 2-engined passenger plane. It was all painted orange. And we knew it had to be painted orange because Holland, being a neutral, was required to paint their plane with a visible color. What we didn't know is that it also required them to frost the windows of the airplane. So the biggest disappointment for my brother and I was that we got on board the plane was that we couldn't look out the window and see where we were flying or what was going on down below us. And they frosted the window because the Germans were afraid that people would fly on the aircraft of these neutral countries and would look out the window and spot their armaments. Anyway, we did arrive in London, and we stayed at the Cumberland Hotel on Speaker's Corner in London. And we spent about 3-4 weeks or 5 weeks, actually 6 weeks in London. Why did we have to spend so much time there? Because they expected that our ship would sail in a convoy from Liverpool, and they weren't going to announce the date of the sailing. At that time, Germany was at war with England, and they were pushing their submarine warfare. A lot of British ships were being sunk, freighters, passenger ships, whatever the Nazis could sink, they would sink. So they didn't want anybody to know when our ship would sail. And they told us, eventually you will hear when you're to make your way to Liverpool and board your ship, but you are not to say anything to anyone, because they were afraid of German spies on the British Isles, and there were quite a number who were there. Well, eventually we did get notification, and we had to make our way to Liverpool, and we did, and we boarded the ship, the Britannic, and we went to bed that night, and we got up in the morning all excited about going up on deck and looking around at all the other ships that were supposed to be sailing with us in this convoy coming to the United States. Well, we got upstairs and we looked out, and there wasn't a ship in sight. There we were, sailing in the ocean, not another ship anywhere to be seen. And we asked what happened, and we were told by the crew that we were on a fairly modern ship, a motor ship, which could outsail the steamships that were sailing in convoy. So they chose to make their way alone across the Atlantic. What we did see as we stood on the fantail of the ship was the wake of the ship. And the wake of the ship wasn't just a straight, foamy line following the boat, but it made a zigzag shape all the way across the Atlantic. It would go this way, the ship would turn this way, would turn again in the other direction, and we wondered why it was doing that. And we were told that that was in the event of a torpedo attack, that just the turning, the zigzagging, might help us avoid that torpedo attack. So we were told just to keep a watch while we were sailing, to watch for periscopes. If we saw any, to report it immediately. Of course, we didn't see anything like that. And on April 1st, 1940, we sailed past the Statue of Liberty in New York Harbor, landed on Manhattan Island, and were taken to a hotel on Broadway, about 100th Street. The Whitehall Hotel at that time doesn't exist anymore. 35 days after we arrived in the United States, the Nazis invaded Holland, violating their neutrality, and took over that country. And at that time, that was the end of being able to extricate my grandparents and my aunt from Amsterdam. And they wound up being taken by the Nazis to the concentration camp of Sobibor, where they lost their lives in the gas chambers there. We didn't know that until sometime in the middle 1940s, but that was the end for them. My brother and I attended a local public school in New York City. We could not speak the language, but we were damn good at math because we learned math in Holland. They made sure we learned it well. So we had these great marks in math, in arithmetic, and we could do long division. We could do all these things that third graders couldn't do here in America at that time. But our English, non-existent. So my parents took us that summer and put us into a camp run by the Y organization, the YMHA. And we went to Cold Springs Harbor to a camp by the name of Surprise Lake Camp, and we were put into a bunk with 6 other children, and 3 weeks later my parents came up to visit their boys. I think you got a photograph of that. There it is. There we are. That's my brother and I at Surprise Lake Camp, and that is our counselor standing there between us. And my parents went to the counselor and said, "How are the boys doing?" And the counselor said, "Well, exactly what do you mean? How are they doing? They're doing very well. What do you mean?" And he said, and my parents said, "Well, you know, they don't speak English." And the counselor looked at them with a puzzled expression and said, "What do you mean they don't speak English? They speak English like all the other kids in the camp do. They're perfect. There's nothing wrong with their English." My parents couldn't believe it. We had acquired the English language in those 3 weeks that we had been at the camp. Now, just being with other kids for that short period of time and having to live with just hearing them speak and knowing one or two of the words, because Dutch has a lot of the English words in it, knowing some of those words and what we had learned, we picked it up very, very rapidly. So, if you want to learn a language, I suggest that you get to it as early as you can in your life. Being 8 years old, 9 years old, 10 years old, 11 years old, that's the time to do it. And submerge yourself with others who speak only the language you want to learn, because that's how you're going to learn, and you're going to learn it well, and you're going to learn it very, very fast. So that's where we were. Now, along came 1942. And I'm reaching for 42 because we had been in the United States for 2 years, and we read about it, and the Germans held a conference in Wannsee, which is south of Berlin, little resort place, had beautiful mansions, and the higher-ups of the Nazi organization gathered there. And they sat around in big leather chairs, smoking big fat cigars, drinking the best cognac that they could get from France, which they had invaded. And guess what they did? They planned the final solution of the Jewish problem in Germany and Europe. And they planned how they were going to destroy an entire group of people, all the Jews in Germany, in Poland, in Eastern Europe, indeed in all of Europe, putting them in concentration camp, forced labor, starving them so they could not live, and of course, you know the result. 6 million of them died, together with 5 million others who weren't Jewish but were also caught up in the same frenzy by the Nazis. So, I can tell you today that I was truly one of the lucky ones not to have been caught up in the horrors of the Holocaust, escaping just as the door closed behind us. And that is pretty much our whole story. Now, I have one other thing that I'd like to tell you. A few years ago, Anita and I were in New Orleans. Actually, we went down there to celebrate New Year's. And we visited the World War II Museum. And if you ever get a chance to go to New Orleans, I urge you to go and visit the World War II Museum in New Orleans. It's a wonderful, wonderful exhibit. It shows everything that happened during World War II. And I particularly have to be grateful for America and for the young men and women who joined the armed forces in 1941 when America declared war on Germany, and then saved the world from the scourge of Nazism. So please see that. But in that museum was a big photograph right at the entrance as you come in. And the photograph, believe it or not, was of the city of Cologne after the war ended in 1945. And what you see are a lot of skeletal buildings, all bombed out, nothing left. What is left, strangely enough, is the cathedral, the Dome Cathedral in the center of Cologne, right next to which was the Dome Hotel from which we witnessed Kristallnacht. And also visible in that photograph was the bridge that we used to drive across to visit my grandparents. And that bridge looks like it's completely bombed out and lying in the Rhine River. So it was destroyed and it was just sunk there. But there it is in New Orleans. The photograph is right on that wall. And if you get down there, it's a worthwhile thing to come and see. So thank you for listening to my story. I am now available to take your questions, and please let me have them and I'll try to answer them as best I can. I know you probably have a bunch.
Mr. Schneck, if you get questions, if you could repeat them.
Yes, I'll be glad to. This question is, would non-Jews tell on Jews if found or seen? Well, it depends who they were. Non-Jews, there were many people who would tell the officials, the police, the Gestapo, who was Jewish. The Gestapo made it its business to know who everyone was and what their religion was. You know, you couldn't tell a Jew from an Aryan just by looking at them, although the Germans said you could, but you couldn't. So, yes, they were, many people said, oh, they're Jewish and, you know, we distrust them. We want you to keep an eye on them. We don't know what to think of them, etc. Yeah, they did. They did tell on Jews if they could. Yes. Next question. Did I wear wooden shoes? No. We saw a lot of Dutch who did wear wooden shoes, but I could never clamber into one of them. They were clumsy and clock, clock, clock. So no, I didn't have wooden shoes and I never wore them. But what we did not have and which we wanted were ice skates so that we could participate in skating on the canals in Holland. And unfortunately, that never happened. Can I have the next question? Were you physically harmed in any way? No. Just that one threat that my mother made. Of all people, you know, it wasn't the Gestapo, it was my mother who said, I'm going to kill them, you know. So no, I was never harmed. And then there was a follow-up. Did you witness any physical harm to others or deceased people? Well, no and yes. My brother and I went to school, and as I told you, it was a Jewish school. And when we left in the afternoons when classes were over, of course, everybody knew that those students who left that school were Jewish. And we were chased by Nazi youths. They made it a sport to come running after the Jews, and they would yell nasty, make nasty comments and throw rocks at us. My brother and I learned how to run pretty fast to escape that kind of an assault. And interesting story I have to tell you is when we came to the United States, and I think we were in the 6th grade in school, and they had a field day in which they had races. They had a 100-yard dash and a few other races like that. And they didn't expect very much from my brother and I because we were not the biggest kids in the class nor known for our athletic prowess. But guess what? the two of us came in 1 and 2 in that 100-yard dash. Now, how'd we do that? Well, we learned how to run in Germany, and that's where. Thank you. What happened to your brother? Is he still alive? Thank you for, whoever I gave that question, thank you for asking it.
Williams Township.
Well,
Someone in our school.
well, thank you very much, Lee. My brother, unfortunately, died when he was 54 years old. He had pancreatic cancer. But before that time, he made quite a career for himself. Both my brother and I graduated as electrical engineers from Cornell University. And my brother made it his career. He joined a company in the United States that was involved in developing the Hubble spacecraft. And my brother was an expert on the technology of mirrors. And he designed the mirrors for the Hubble spacecraft, which enabled it to see into outer space. Indeed, when I talk to my nephews and nieces, they tell me that if he had not died and been alive, then it wouldn't have been necessary years after the Hubble went up into space to send up the astronauts to do repairs on that mirror. He would have gotten it right in the first place. Unfortunately, he died before that happened. But besides being involved in that and designing the mirrors for the Hubble spacecraft, he and 4 other engineers, or 3 other engineers, they were known as the Gang of 4, testified before a Senate committee that was chaired by Malcolm Wallop, who was senator from one of the western states. And the job of that committee, this was during the Reagan administration, was to determine whether space warfare was feasible. And yes, they convinced them that it was, and that is why we have done so much in the way of arms in space. So he had quite a career, and I'm very proud of him, and I thank you for asking about him. Ah, okay. Have I ever been back to Germany, is the question. Yes, I've been back to Germany many times. Our business has often taken us there, and I've taken Anita over there and showed her Cologne, where I was born, and showed her the Dome Hotel, which has been rebuilt and where it was. All right. This question is usually followed by a question that says, how do you feel about meeting Germans in Germany? What is your reaction? And I'd like to pass that along to you. If I meet someone who is of the current generation, young people, who were not involved in the generation that persecuted the Jews and who were part of the Nazi regime, then I have no trouble at all conversing with these people, becoming friendly with them, doing business with them. Indeed, I cannot blame the sons and daughters of the perpetrators for the crimes that their parents may or may not have committed. When I meet somebody who is from my generation, the thought has always occurred to me, where were you in 1938 while I was escaping Germany and getting out? And that has always bothered me because I've never had the courage to ask that question of that person. Probably because I was doing business with them, and it would not have been very smart for me to start a conversation that could be so difficult for that person to answer. So I have not said anything like that, but I still have those feelings. I have trouble with the people of my generation who are German. Does that answer the question? Yes.
Ask a follow-up?
Yes, please.
Warner von Braun, who was probably the most famous ex-Nazi, came to the United States and was responsible, I guess by most accounts, for our missions to the moon, which it really became sort of a folk hero in America. What was your reaction, and did you have any response, like when those successes were happening, if you thought those were...
Well, you know, we allowed a lot of German scientists to come into the United States, and they were very helpful in our space race, as Werner von Braun was, and also there were a lot of Germans who came to the United States and helped us in many ways to rebuild to build our economy and our sciences. I prefer not to answer a question of what do I think of him as an individual, because I don't know him as an individual. I don't know how he's changed. I can tell you an interesting story, however, about somebody else who was a son of one of the best or the best known Nazi followers. And it is actually he was the grandson. He's the grandson of Richard Wagner, the man who wrote the operas. And he rejected his family completely at the age of, I think it was about 9, wasn't it? He was in school, and after the war, he was not born till after the war. And he went to school, and the authorities made German children come and watch films of the atrocities that the Germans committed in the concentration camps. I think it was possibly Buchenwald, was it? So they showed the children the films of the liberation of Buchenwald. And when they all left, you know, when you get a school of many, many 9-year-olds, and they're all leaving school, what do you see? You see a lot of ball playing, you see a lot of shouting, you see a lot of fun and patting each other on the back and what have you. Well, when he left that school with all his classmates, not a word was spoken. And they just wandered out. And when he got home, he asked his parents, was this true? Did this happen? And his parents, who were Nazis, particularly his grandmother, who actually furnished the paper to Adolf Hitler to write Mein Kampf when he was in jail, said, oh, you know, don't believe this is all propaganda by the Americans. It was never like that. And don't you believe it. Hitler was a wonderful man and what have you. So he did not accept that explanation. And he made it his business to delve into the studies of what happened. And he has been here in the United States. He's spoken extensively. I met him in Wilmington when he came to speak at a Holocaust commemoration weekend, and we became good friends. We've been in communication with each other. So I prefer to deal with people like that who have been able to admit what happened. I can tell you another story which is also interesting in this regard. We were on the ferry going to Bald Head Island, Anita and I, and there were 2 visitors on the ferry coming to the island, and I heard them speaking German. And when I hear somebody speaking German, I butt into the conversation, say hello. And I did, and we got to talking, and they asked me when I left Germany. And I told them, well, you know, Hitler threw me out. I left Germany in 1938. And she said to me something which I found rather interesting and very striking. She said, "Ach, die dunkle Zeit." Oh, she said, the dark times. So it's interesting to note that the younger generations coming from Germany recognize and are not very proud of what happened in Germany during the Hitler years. And things in Germany are very different today. Germany is one of the only countries in Europe, perhaps in the world, where denial of the Holocaust is illegal. So you can see that the Germans are not very proud of what happened in World War II, and they seem to recognize it. Does that answer your question? Okay. Any more? To which camp was your family sent? Is it still standing today? Well, as you've heard my story, you know that I never was sent to any camp. That didn't happen until after we had left Europe. We had escaped twice by the skin of our teeth, once from Germany and once shortly before the Nazis invaded Holland. So I wasn't in any of the camps. My grandparents, however, were taken to Sobibor, and Sobibor was one of the death camps, and they were killed there. There's another part to this question. Have you visited any of the sites where these atrocities took place? No, I haven't. That's still to come. I think that if Anita and I get a chance, we will do that. I've wanted to go to Auschwitz and to some of the camps that are so famous or are known. Actually, I was very near Auschwitz in one of my business trips, but didn't have a chance to get over there. So I will do so before I lay myself to rest. There's still time left. I'm only 12, you know. How many different languages are you able to speak? Fluently? The only language I can speak is English, and sometimes I worry about that. I speak German. I don't get very much practice because there aren't very many Germans whom I can converse with, but I do understand them and I can speak it. I unfortunately lost my ability to speak Dutch. I know a few words, and I can still read a little bit of it, and I could probably pick it up again if I put my mind to it, but that's it. And I've picked up a little bit of Spanish, just enough to say hello and to find my way around, because our business takes us all over the world. So languages are an important thing in your life, and it's easy to acquire that knowledge. And I encourage you to do so. I can tell you a story about that. When we were in England on our way to the United States, and we were staying at the Cumberland Hotel in London, England was on a war footing, and there were blackouts at night, so you needed to have a flashlight to find your way around, and the flashlight that we had, the bulb had burned out in it. So my father sent me out to go to Regent Street, right around the corner, and to find a bulb. Well, I couldn't speak the language. I had no idea what a bulb was. And I told him, I said, how am I going to do that? And he said, well, let me look it up. And he looked it up, and yeah, there it was in the dictionary. A bulb is a bulb. And he made me say it, and I said it. And he says, now you go down, you'll see some stores there, and you just ask for a bulb. So here I was, couldn't speak the language. I walked downstairs, down Regent Street, and the first shop we went to was a little candy shop, sold cigarettes and all kinds of things like that. And I went inside, and I showed him the dead bulb. I said, I didn't say I need, I said a bulb. He said, oh yes, I'll get it for you. And sure enough, he got me a bulb, and I never had to exchange a word. And yet, I could make myself understood simply by gesturing by saying what I could or that I wanted it or what have you. So I learned something from that. And I suggest that you take that lesson with you as well. Don't ever be afraid to enter or be in a country where you don't understand the language. You can make yourself understood. We had an instance, you want to tell this, Anita? In Russia, where we...
Well, I think you should answer some more of the questions.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. Well, this is interesting. Come on. Come on.
They might need you at the microphone.
Come here. Explain to him what happened when we went to Russia, to Leningrad, which is now St. Petersburg, which is St. Petersburg. And we had an adventure there because we were going out to dinner at the Yusupov Palace. And we didn't know where the restaurant was. And we looked for it, and it was number 24, I remember, and the numbers went from 28, 26, 20, skipped 24 altogether, went down to 20. So we didn't know where we were. So we tried to find somebody to help us. Please, go ahead with that.
Well, we looked around, and there was a small park, and we walked across the street to the park, and Alfred tried to speak to people, but the people only spoke Russian, and the gestures didn't help us very much. But we left the park, and we saw a small gas station on the corner, and there was a man there putting gas in his car, and Alfred went over to him and asked him whether he spoke English, and he said no, he didn't speak English, he spoke Spanish. He said that in Spanish. Alfred has a little bit of Spanish, as he told you, so he explained to the man in Spanish where we were trying to go, and he gave the man a paper with the address and the phone number of the restaurant, and the man called up the restaurant and spoke to them in Russian, and they told him in Russian how to find them, and then he translated the Russian into Spanish, and Alfred was able to translate the Spanish into English, and therefore we had dinner that night.
Thank you, sweetheart. Glad you explained it. So, you see, you find your way around no matter where you are. And you can do it. You just have to use a little imagination. Some more questions for me. How were the Jews treated in Amsterdam schools? They were treated very well.
I think that's American schools.
This American, did I misread it?
That's okay.
In American schools.
New York.
Oh, we were treated well enough. You know, you learn a lot as you grow up. In 1945, 46, well, when we were in the United States in 1940, Americans did not like Germans because we were at war with Germany. They didn't say anything about Jews. Jews were accepted in America just like all other Americans were. Yes, there was some anti-Semitism, I can't tell you that, but it was not in the schools. It was in the general public, and you know, times change things. And I don't see very much of it now, but certainly at the time that I went to school, I didn't have any of that there. Yes. Thank you. Did you have any friends that you know died in the Holocaust? Well, we had certainly friends as children. Some of them did not survive, I'm sure about that, but I don't remember them. We were so careful to live that undercover life that we didn't get a chance much to participate in the lives of other children, Jewish children, in Germany at the time. There's something else here. Did you and your brother look alike. Oh yeah, we looked a lot alike. That picture still, it's hard to make out there, but I have photographs that I look at and I can't tell whether it's me or whether it's my brother. We looked so much alike. It's difficult to make out here, but you can see there's very little difference between us. Then the question goes on, do you ever think about what would have happened if you would have moved to a different country that wasn't in the war? Well, I would have certainly learned a different language, that's for sure. And no, I've never thought about that. I was just so grateful to be here and to be an American, to be an American citizen. As a matter of fact, I was singularly honored this last year, to give the keynote address at the July 4th celebration in Southport, where the new citizens were given the oath of citizenship. And I gave the keynote address at that event. And for me, that was quite an honor to be able to do that. So I'm very proud of that. How did you like living in New York when you first moved there? Oh, it was amazing. We as children had heard about skyscrapers and big buildings. And this you didn't have in Europe. They didn't have big buildings in Europe. The tallest building in Europe was maybe 4 or 6 stories high. That was it. But we knew that in New York you had these enormous buildings. We could hardly imagine what it was like. And when we got to New York, every building was more than 6 stories. Most of them went up 20 to 40 stories, and on Broadway up to 90 stories, God knows what, very high. So for us, it was just an amazing sight. And seeing the Empire State Building and the buildings in New York, and just seeing New York City was quite an amazing for both my brother and I. Well, you got a lot of questions.
We do. You want that water?
No, thank you. What is your current business and that takes you around the world? Well, my wife and I distribute stainless steel and electrical steels. I'm an electrical engineer, so electrical steels are used in the manufacture of transformers. And we sell them all over the world. We sell them principally today, we've sold them in Asia and in South America. And we sell stainless steel all over the world and distribute it also in the United States. And our office is located in Wilmington. We love the city of Wilmington. It's a great place, almost as good as Whiteville. Well, we like Whiteville too. But it's a great, it is by far the best state of the Union, North Carolina is, that we've ever lived in. So take my word for it. You guys are very fortunate to be here.
We've had the privilege of seeing you personally, but do we have any questions in this audience?
Yes, please.
Have you ever gotten a chance to learn how to ice skate?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Have you ever gotten a chance to learn how to ice skate?
To ice skate. Oh, yeah, when I came to the United States, one of the first things I did was, well, I said, Mom, I want ice skates. Where do I get them? So sure enough, they got us ice skates, and we went to the local rink, which was right in Flushing Meadow near LaGuardia Airport. They had a beautiful ice skating rink, and first thing I did was fall on my face. So I said, oh, this is not too easy. But we did get to ice skate, yes. Any other questions from this group? Yes.
How long was the trip from Holland to America?
Oh, I think it took us about 6-7 days. It was pretty quick. Not like flying an airplane, but quick enough. And we didn't have to row. That was very more important. Anything else? Yes, sir.
Have you ever read a book, The Diary of Anne Frank?
Yes, I have. I think that's a good one because tells the feelings. It's really a wonderful, wonderful diary. And have you read it? Please do, because it gives you an idea of what happened to people who were not as lucky as I was to get out and had to live and survive in that period of time. And unfortunately, as you know, Anne Frank did not survive the whole war. But during the time that she did, she was an incredible writer. So it's worthwhile reading.
We've enjoyed it early.
Yes.
I have a question with Anne Frank. She's famous for her quote that she still believes people are good at heart.
Yes, that's right.
What feelings do you have after all your encounters?
If they have hearts, they're good at heart.
That's
I think people in general mean to be good. One of the things that I think all of you have basically within you, and something that is so important to preserve the liberties that we have in the United States of America, is to be tolerant of others. Now, I know you've all learned that, and I think it's a basic thing that's in everybody's heart. And I believe that, and I believe it strongly. But tolerance is so important, and it is what makes this country worthwhile. We can give everybody their opinion, and we don't have to agree with them, but we have to be tolerant enough to understand that they have a choice to make and that their choice may not be ours, but we allow it. That's important, and that's what the Nazis could not do.
We also, I know we mentioned at the beginning of our session of our Aggies Rock, that's our positive behavior intervention support, but we even include respect in there. So even more than just being tolerant, but respecting others and their beliefs and their thoughts. I like that. All right, do we have any more questions here? Angel, you look like you're burning with one. You got what?
How do you think your reaction would have been if you had to stay quiet all day like Anne Frank?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
How do you think you would have reacted if you had to stay quiet like Anne Frank all day?
Oh, my God. You know something? I'm going to get my wife to answer your question. She knows me better than anybody. You think I could do that? No. She says it's not possible. So I think they would have had a difficult time, and unfortunately, I think we would have been taken away much, much sooner than Anne Frank. But, you know, I would have had to learn to express myself in writing, and maybe that's what enabled her to do it. So you got to give a gal like that an awful lot of credit. She's really quite an individual. Please read her book if you haven't already. Maybe you have. Yes? No. I did not know Anne Frank. She died before the war was over, and I've been to her house and saw that in Holland, but that's a tourist site, and you should all go and see it. It's interesting. Learn more about it, if you can. You guys interested in travel? Raise your hands. You all like to travel? Should we take them all with us?
Yes.
What would you do without your children in class?
Go with you.
Yeah. Oh. You're invited too. Okay. Good. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate your attention. You've been a great audience. All of you out there in the Etherland also, thank you for your attention, and I hope that it's been helpful. Please feel free to contact me if you have questions. You can reach me with my email address. Maybe you could pass that around and let people be able to communicate. If you have other questions, don't hesitate to ask. Thank you very much.
We would like to present a gift. We thank you so much. We just can't tell you how grateful we are for you coming and just to be here. But here's a small gift from the home of the Aggies. So that's a blanket that you and your wife can share. Okay?
This will enable us to recall the undercover life we lived. We can put this over our heads, right? And nobody will know who we are or where we are or what we are. Well, thank you very much. Very, very kind of you.